Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm sharing some easy die cut interactive cards using the new Hero Arts Spooky Smiles collection. In this collection, we have the Big Mouth Vampire, the Big Mouth Cat, as well as the Big Mouth Jack-o'-lantern die set. And then there is a stamp and die set that is perfect for the sentiments for this set. Now these are companion dies to the Big Mouth slider die set. So this slider die set creates the mechanism for the mouth to open and close, and it's really quite easy to use. Here is the Bite Nite stamp and die set. So there's lots of different sentiments in there, and we're going to use one for each one of the cards. I'm starting off with the Big Mouth Vampire die set, and I have his face die cut out of some Fog cardstock. I'm going to use some Regal Gray interference ink to do a little bit of light ink blending around the outside. You could just use regular ink, like a dye-based ink if you prefer. This is just going to give a little bit of purple shimmer. The interference inks have two colors in one. Because we're using a light cardstock, we're going to see the gray ink, but when we tilt it into the light, we're going to see the purple shimmer. If this was a dark colored cardstock, we'd see more of the purple interference color to it. So these are fun pads to play with and a great way to just add a little bit of shimmer and just give a little bit of interest to the die cut. And I'm going to use some interference on each one of the cards. I just really love the look and I have a hard time not using them on everything. So I just did a little bit of light ink blending around the outside edges. I have an A2 card base here, and I have a piece of 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch Teal Topaz cardstock for the background to my card. Now off screen, I took this little U-shaped die from the Big Mouth slider die, and I cut the bottom part of the opening for the mouth. And the way I positioned it was I took this interactive die piece from it. I die cut 3 of them for each one of the cards. I laid it over that 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch piece, so I knew where that was going to sit underneath. And then I positioned that U-shaped die so that I knew exactly where to center it. So for this piece here, again, I have 3 of them. I'm going to layer them on top right onto my A2 card base. Now, whatever color your card base is the color you're going to see in the mouth, unless you add another layer of cardstock underneath these interactive pieces or put in a little piece of cardstock with your sentiment. And I'll do that for the second card. For this one and for the third card, we're just going to have white inside the mouth. So I'm layering these on top of each other, making sure they're all lined up. And I'm just using my Barely Art glue in the fine line bottle. I want to make sure that I have a decent amount of glue on there, but I don't want my glue to ooze out the edges, especially on that lower half of the card. The upper half of the card, the inner parts aren't going to touch it, but that lower half of the card, our slider piece here, is going to be rubbing against it. And I want to make sure that I don't have any glue out there so that it sticks to that. Now I put my little tab on there a little bit high, so for the second and third card I know to put it a little bit farther down, but really you only need about 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch overlap when you glue that tab onto that interactive slider piece. Before we put our card together, I'm going to assemble the face pieces onto our little Dracula vampire, and I'm going to also stamp the sentiment in the center. So these dies here, when you die cut them, they put a little indent showing you where the layers are supposed to go, so it makes it really easy to know exactly where to place the glue on that base. And then I just used the wax tip tool from my handy tool set in order to lift those die cuts and place them exactly where I wanted them to go. Now the stamp set for the sentiments is a stamp and cut, so it has coordinating dies. I won't be using the dies in this video. I'm just going to be stamping right onto the card bases or the extra piece of paper cardstock in the second card so that I don't have to cut them out. Now you could, if you wanted the sentiment to be a little bit more prominent, you could stamp it onto a different color cardstock from the base and then die cut it so that it would have a little bit more presence in the mouth. But because we've got an interactive feature and that sentiment gets revealed, I didn't really think it was necessary. So in order to position my sentiment, I layer the pieces for my card together without gluing them, and then I position my sentiment using my Misty stamping tool so that I know where it's going to be positioned and be showing in the opening of the mouth. This is one thing that you don't want to just guess because it would be too easy to position it wrong. So I positioned all of those pieces with that stamp in the center, made the stamp stick to the lid of my Misty stamping tool before stamping it with just some black Memento ink. And obviously that can be done with whatever colored ink you want. Once that is stamped, we're ready to assemble our card. So the first step is to put that little slider mechanism in there before we add our card background onto those layered interactive dies. Now I die cut 3 layers of that interactive piece there. You could do it with 2 layers if you want. You just want to make sure that there's enough room for our slider piece to move, and I wanted to make sure that it wasn't too tight. So I ended up doing 3 layers because I wanted just that extra knowledge that it was going to have enough room to move in there. Once we are done that, we can start layering on the die cut pieces. So I have the cape here. I'm only putting glue on the 2 edges because that center part of our card is open. I don't want glue on there. I don't want to accidentally glue my slider piece in place. So make sure to put the glue only on the outside edges. Then we're gluing on the face, and I just put the glue around the outside of the underside of his face, and then all along the top part and some in the middle of the top part. Again, we're keeping room for the opening. We want to make sure we don't have any exposed glue there. Next, we can glue on the hair, and then we can glue on the bow on the cape. Now that cape is die cut out of Ruby Mirror Cardstock from the Ruby Treasured Cardstock pack, and the bow is Onyx Mirror Cardstock. So it has a really nice gloss to it. You could also do it out of regular cardstock and then use interference inks to ink blend on that if you wanted to have it have a look like the vampire face. But I just thought having the shiny cardstock for the cape would look really nice. Almost make it look a little bit like satin or something. The last step here is I'm going to add a little bit of glossy accents to the eyes. This is just going to give them some glossy dome dimension, and again, a different finish from just regular cardstock. That's another step that you could omit if you want, but I love finding ways to add different textures to things. So I'm going to set that aside to completely dry while I'm working on the next cards. So the next one I'm using is the Big Mouth Jack-o'-lantern die set. I have the pumpkin die cut out of Carrot Cardstock, and I have the greenery die cut out of Peridot Cardstock. I'm using some Magic Garden interference ink to ink blend on the greenery and the stem, and I'm using some pumpkin spice interference ink to ink blend around that pumpkin. So the Magic Garden is green, but it has a purple interference to it, so when you tilt it in the light, it'll show a little bit of purple. And then same with the orange. The orange has the pumpkin spice has orange ink, but when you tilt it in the light, it's got a little bit of purple to it. So again, it just adds a really beautiful shimmer to it. And I think it's really perfect for Halloween cards especially, but I love using it for a lot of different things. So once we have that ink blended, we can start assembling the face for our jack-o'-lantern. So there's a long oval piece that gets die cut, and I die cut it out of black cardstock to cover the eyes and the nose. And then there's 2 little moon shapes that get glued to the center for a little bit of light there. And that was just I cut out of Saffron Cardstock. Then we can glue our tab onto the bottom part of the slider feature. And for this one, I made sure to glue it a little bit farther down so that we have a little bit longer tab. Next, we can glue down our interactive pieces. This is die cut from that Big Mouth slider die set. So you do need the companion die with this in order to create it this way. I've done it in the past where I've just used rectangle dies to make do because I didn't have the base die yet. It's definitely much easier when you have the base die to go with it. And there's also a nutcracker that you can do with the base die. There's also sardine can that you can do with the base cut die. So there's some companion dies that you can create some different pieces all throughout the year as well. So once we have these 3 layered together, we can start doing our sentiment for inside that mouth. And for this one, I wanted the inside of the mouth to be black, so I opted to do it on a separate piece of cardstock. I'm going to heat emboss that sentiment with some white embossing powder, so that it's nice and vibrant and really shows on the background of that piece of cardstock. You could also use a metallic like a gold or a silver here as well. That would work well as well. Another option would be to just stamp it right onto the base of the card. But with the color of the eyes for this one, I thought having a white inside of the mouth looked a little bit odd. But again, to make it really easy, I could have taken another piece of 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch cardstock and glued that to my card base before adding those layered interactive die cuts on top. So before I did that embossing, I did put some embossing powder tulle on that. So once it's done being die cut, that adds a little bit of cloudy, or being stamped, it adds a little bit of cloudiness to it. So I just use my fingers to rub that off and to clean that off a little bit. I had my sentiment just a little bit too low, so I want to just layer my pieces together to make sure that I have the sentiment properly placed when I glue it to the back of the card. The nice thing about using a liquid glue is when I go to glue it down and I layer those pieces back on, just again to make sure that it's in the right spot, I have the flexibility to move it and to shimmy it in place. So I can make sure that it is positioned properly before I press it down and make sure it has some really good contact there. Now that we have our sentiment in there, we're ready to start finishing our assembly for our card. So I'm going to add that interactive slider piece in the bottom part before we glue our card back onto our interactive pieces on the inside. Once again, using that liquid glue. That liquid glue makes it really, really easy because you can move and shimmy things in place. I use my liquid glue for pretty much everything for that reason. Now, the one thing I made a mistake of here is I accidentally put the glue too far to the center. I wasn't thinking about that opening there, but just before I place it down, I realized my mistake. So I just rubbed that off. As long as it doesn't have contact with it, you're totally fine, but you want to make sure to rub that off and just basically leave it alone for a little bit so that that can dry. So I glued my pumpkin down, and then we're going to glue down our little vine pieces here as well as the stem. And again, because these are ink blended, but the background is a little bit darker than the Peridot cardstock, we can see the difference in the different greens there. So I did two different greens. That cardstock for the background is Rainforest, and then the cardstock for the vines and the stem are Peridot before they are ink blended. So I always make sure as I'm doing this that my pieces are working and that they slide in place. So as soon as I have everything together, I always make sure that everything is working properly. For my last card, I'm using the Big Mouth Cat. I have it die cut out of some Anchor cardstock, and I'm using some charcoal gold interference ink to ink blend around this. This is a black ink that has a gold interference to it. So you could do as much or as little of this as you want. I'm just putting a little bit around the outside edges. Another option here would be to use that Regal Gray that I used for the first card. That one is a gray, but it has a purple shimmer to it. This one is black with a gold shimmer to it. So I wanted to do something a little bit different from the first one, and I thought the gold shimmer was perfect again for Halloween colors. So as I'm doing this, I'm making sure to just do a little bit. I want a little bit here. I don't want it covered with interference ink. I like the look of how heavy it gets around the outside edges, but I don't want the interference to go all the way into the cat's face. For the collar here and the bow, I have that die cut out of Peridot cardstock, and then I ink blended that with some Magic Garden interference ink, again, just to give it a little bit of visual interest. Before I assemble my card, I'm just going to add the features to the cat. So just like that first card, I just put the glue into the little indents that get put on there when you do the die cutting. Then I'm using my wax tip tool in order to pick up those little die cut pieces and place them. Once I have everything placed, then we can set this aside to dry and we can work on our sentiment. Another option would be to assemble the card, putting the sentiment in there in the middle of that, and then adding the facial feature pieces once the whole thing is assembled. But I like to do that at this point. It really doesn't matter, but I just like to have all of these pieces together before I put it on the front of the card. There's also less things sitting on my desk as I'm creating when I do this. So once again, put the collar on there and then the bow. There are indents for where the little whisker pieces are going. So I put little stripes of glue there. I'm just going to lay those little whisker pieces in there. And I have those die cut out of black cardstock. The eyes were die cut out of saffron cardstock, and then just raven cardstock for the pupil centers. You can really have a lot of fun. I always love doing cats with green eyes as well. So you could always do that, and then say a purple bow tie and collar would be fun, or an orange bow tie and collar would be fun. Again, you can have a lot of fun here. So once again, I have my A2 card base. I'm gluing these interactive pieces on there. Now, the one thing that I made a mistake of here is I just pressed that flat. I didn't make sure that the bottom part was even with the sides of my card. I did that for the first two without incident, but I don't realize until I'm ready to assemble the card, and once the glue has settled, that the side pieces went just a little bit too close in. You can barely see it on the front of the card. The only reason I notice it is when I go to put the slider piece in, it's just a tiny bit too big. So I'll show you in a minute how I fix that, but it's always easier to prevent that. So when you're putting these pieces down, especially that first piece, make sure that they are even with the outside layers of the outside edges of the card, so that you don't have those pieces pushing in a little bit. And that's something that you can easily run into when you have thinner strips like that. So once again, I'm layering the pieces up in my Misty stamping tool in order to make sure that I position the sentiment correctly. And then I'm stamping it with the black Memento ink. And again, you could just put color underneath here if you wanted it to have, or colored cardstock, sorry, if you wanted it to have some color inside the mouth. This is where I realized that my inside or my interactive bits just shifted in a little bit as I was gluing them together. Again, super easy fix by just snipping a tiny little bit off of those edges. You never know. But again, it's always easier to prevent that originally than to have to fix it. So once again, as I put my background on there, I do make sure that those pieces move, that slider moves nicely on me. So I make sure that I'm not having anything where it's not supposed to go. Again, when I put the cat down, I made sure not to put glue on the center part of the cat, so the glue is only around the outside edges where that opening is on the bottom of the card. Just like my first card, I'm going to put some glossy dome dimension on those eyes, so I put a nice layer of glossy accents. Now, because the center parts of those eyes are really quite pointed, it's really hard to get the glossy accents in there, so I use the die pick tool from my handy tool set, and I just fix it and really make that edge pointed. And if there's anything that goes off the edge, I also use that same tool to fix it. You have to do that while the glossy accents is liquid, because otherwise it's going to dry like that. You're not going to be able to fix it. So I let that dry for I think about 45 minutes to an hour. Here is the final result, the finished card. Nice and easy slider that reveals the sentiment in the mouth. We have the gold shimmer from the interference inks around the outside edge, and that gold looks really nice with the saffron color for the eyes. We also have those interference inks on the collar as well. You could also use some specialty cardstock for the collar if you wanted to give it a different bit of finish, but I really love that green with the inks on there. Now here is our pumpkin with our black and white sentiment on the inside of it. Again, with the interference inks around the outside of those die cuts. And then we have our vampire, and that has some teal topaz in the back, so it shows off the vampire silhouette really, really well. I just have his skin done out of fog cardstock, so it's got nice and pale skin with that interference inks. And I really love the look of the ruby mirror cardstock for the cape. It totally reflects in the light and just kind of gives it a regal look to it. You'll find everything that I've used listed and linked down in the description box below. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. I always appreciate all the time that you do spend here. I hope you have a fantastic day.